I see you in the queue. Stanley Garnett. All right. Well, there you are.
Sorry.
You may begin.
Thank you very much. My name's Stan Garnett. Thank you very much, Chairman, and all the members of the committee for the opportunity to testify this evening. I should mention that I really admire the time and effort that all of you put into your service, and thank you for that. Let me talk very briefly about my background, and then I'll state why I'm in support of the governor's proposed bill. I live in Boulder, Colorado. I was on the Boulder School Board for 8 years, and then I was the elected district attorney in Boulder, Colorado from 2008 until 2018. I've been a lawyer in practice in Colorado for almost 40 years, and I've handled all kinds of cases. When I was elected district attorney in 2008, I was somewhat blindsided in January of 2009 by the almost instantaneous commercialization of the medical marijuana business that had existed in Colorado since 1999. And let me mention that I had not been supportive of medical marijuana in 1999, and I was not supportive of recreational marijuana when it was on the ballot in 2012. However, in my 10 years as district attorney, during which time I served as the president of the Colorado District Attorneys Council and was also on the board of directors of the National District Attorneys Association, I gradually became very supportive of Colorado's effort to legalize and regulate marijuana. There's been a lot of discussion about all the issues that matter. I've heard as much of it today as I was been able to listen into. And those issues that matter are public safety. How do we protect children? How do we deal with impaired driving? And how do we approach the issues that we need to all approach to keep our communities safe? Let me mention that in Colorado, the district attorney is the highest and most important law enforcement official in the jurisdiction. And so I had to wrestle with these issues almost immediately upon taking office. We have submitted a slide deck several hours ago, which I have sent to you. And I would encourage you to take a look at it beginning with page 36, which has extensive data from the Colorado Department of Health about all the issues that folks are appropriately concerned about. Crime rates, marijuana and driving, and particularly youth use. Barbara Broll, whom I've known for many years, is correct that the system in Colorado has not had significant impacts on any of those areas. And in fact, we appear to see a reduction in youth use since legalization. Finally, let me say that I have reviewed and read both the proposed legislation from Governor Lamont's office, as well as the summary. I think this legislation, though not perfect, is a good start. And it's much better, frankly, than the approach that Colorado took, which, as many have pointed out to you, we did not have a legislative approach. The legislature didn't want to touch this. So instead, the people passed 2 constitutional amendments, which all of law enforcement opposed, including myself. But since they passed, we then had to figure out what to do with them. This is the way to do it. Pass a bill that's reasonable, that approaches the issues that are in front of you, and then have it in a manner that can be amended as you go forward to make it fit your communities. Finally, let me say this. It is not an issue between being pro-addiction or pro-children use or anti-addiction and anti-use by children. Of course, none of us want children using marijuana. None of us want to see addiction develop. But the reality is legalization and regulation works much better than criminalization in almost every respect. In one of the most important areas, and I found this particularly in the interaction with my service on the school board, is that with a legalization and regulation system, law enforcement is able to know who is selling marijuana in the community. And with the previous complete criminalization, or even the decriminalization issue that you have now in Connecticut, there is a thriving illegal market, which is very, very difficult to regulate. So I support the governor's bill, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Representative Day, did you have your hand up, or was that from before?
Oh, yeah, no, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Garnett, thank you very much for your testimony. We're fellow trial lawyers, both the chairman, Stastrom, myself, and you appear to be fairly familiar and comfortable with the courtroom. So I appreciate your testimony, sir. Have you been asked to testify here today by anybody in particular?
I was asked by Mohit Agrawal of the governor's office, and my law firm, which I'm a shareholder at, has done a fair amount of, I've done testimony along with one of my partners for Scott's True Grow and Hawthorne Gardening. Not today, I wasn't asked by them to testify, but I have done it in the past.
So is this a pro bono project or a consultant project?
I'm a consultant, although to be honest, I'm not actually sure that I'm getting paid for today. People more important than me will figure that out, but I want to make sure you guys know I do care about the issue and I want to see good policy adopted, but I was asked by the governor's office to speak.
No problem whatsoever, sir. I didn't mean to imply anything.
No, of course.
And I think you and I are on the same page. If you could wave a magic wand and just prevent anybody under 25 from using marijuana in any way, but then let anybody else do what they want to do, I probably would be okay with it with the homegrown idea, but we're not in that position. So, your experience in Colorado, you're being opposed to it at first, and now it seems to be you're in favor of it if you do it right. What lessons did you learn, or would you say that you learned and would advise us based on your experiences beyond what you've already testified to?
Thank you for that question. It's a key question. First of all, don't do it by constitutional amendment. It's incredibly difficult to change and modify what gets passed in a constitutional amendment. Do it as you're doing it through legislative committees so that you can consider all the issues and strike an appropriate balance. Number two, with regard to edibles, and Barbara Broll, I think, did a nice job of talking about this. Make sure that you're aware of the risk of the high THC levels in many of those, and that you are finding a way to implement controls of labeling and THC content as well as packaging so that they're not being marketed to children. Next thing I would do is get way ahead of the issue around impaired driving. Impaired driving is an issue, although the statistics will show, as you can tell from my charts, which are incredibly interesting and even colorful. The impaired driving statistics are actually about the same as they were prior to legalization and regulation. One of the things that, of course, you got to deal with, the reality is that marijuana is in your communities everywhere, no matter what you guys do with this. And when I was on the school board elected in 1997, one of the realities we had in marijuana was completely illegal in those days. We had marijuana everywhere in the schools. So the question is, how do you regulate it? How do you deal with it? One of the things that we've done in Colorado that has worked, and it's kind of been ad hoc as we figured it out, we've raised tax revenue on several different levels. We've raised it on the state level, what we have, and Barbara Broll talked well about that. But each municipality has the authority to tax marijuana as well under sales tax measures. And so, for example, in the city of Boulder, the revenue that's been raised has been used to fund drug recognition expert officers in our police department, also in the county sheriff's office, so that we can get ahead of the issues around impaired driving. And then finally, educate. And one of the things that took us a while to do, but I frankly led the charge on this, enlist the industry in helping you with the education so that people understand the dangers of impaired driving, understand what to watch for, and understand the issues around intoxication.
And how is Colorado handling the driving impairment measuring based on the lack of technology to do it?
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. We've got a page on this in my slide deck, not as colorful as the others. Page 37, which talks about this. Colorado adopted as we all know, and I started prosecuting in 1982, and in those days, driving under impairment of alcohol was a 1.0 DUI level in Colorado, and that's since gone down to 0.08, and now 0.05 is impaired. That's a result of increased science, et cetera. We don't have the science yet for marijuana to figure out the connection between THC level and actual impairment, but we did pass a 5 nanogram active THC. It's not a presumption because that's unconstitutional. It's a permissible inference that a jury is permitted to take from a certain level of THC in the bloodstream. That was lower than I wanted. I was president of CDAC at the time, and I was arguing for a 3 nanogram level, which is what many European countries have, but we couldn't get that through the legislature. That has helped. The combination, and I'm sorry, I'll try not to be long-winded, but I am a trial lawyer. The combination of a THC level with drug recognition officers and training your prosecutors and judges on these issues has made it a manageable issue, but we have a ways to go.
Well, as my fellow committee members, as a lawyer, legislator, I'm even worse. So, but in any event, I did want to ask you, so I presume you're I shouldn't say presume, in looking at your bio, are you also a father, being on the board
I
of?
am.
Okay, so I've read mixed articles on the increase of teen use in Colorado. At one point, there were some articles that said it went down, and then lately it seems to have gone up, at least according to some articles I've read. I don't have, do you have any knowledge that you can impart on us on that?
I do, and I think, first of all, Barbara Broll, I think stated accurately that there are some statistical variations from year to year. I don't think they're significant, but let me point out on slide 45, we have a good statistical graph about high school student use of marijuana, which basically shows it's staying about the same, or in fact, perhaps going down. And let me mention something that's unique about Colorado, and I would suggest this to Connecticut. We had the Columbine shooting in 1999. I was on the school board at the time. One of the first things that happened was we lobbied the legislature to put in place a Center for School Safety to study issues around danger, particularly mass shootings, but other things as well. One of the things that they were funded to do beginning in 2002 was comprehensive surveys on dangerous activities by high school students, from sexual behavior to violence to various substance use, marijuana being one of them. So we have a track record we've been able to follow. And I would encourage Connecticut, I don't know what the timeline is for this being legalized, but if you can have an opportunity of beginning to develop baseline data so that you can see what your impact is, that would be helpful. It's been helpful to us. And the reality, I think, and this is somewhat anecdotal, but I think it's true. The police officers in my drug task force, who were a very skilled and aggressive group, began to feel that they would much rather have it in the community that they knew where the marijuana stores were. They know who were selling it. They knew that they had security, and they knew that they were not sneaking around behind the trees by the creek at the high school, like the illegal market tends to do, trying to sell to students. So those are all things that are important. I also think one of the things that's been very interesting, we're trying to analyze in Colorado whether some of the social excitement that high schoolers might feel about using marijuana has decreased since it's become legalized. That may be a factor with the reduction of use. But I will say one last thing that's not insignificant. We do worry about the increased THC level in the new products we're seeing. And finally, this for the students who do use marijuana, the high school youth who do, rather than getting it from the illegal market, from the guy in the parking lot hiding behind the school bus, they now tend to get it from their parents, just like they did for years. That's how they've been getting their alcohol, is stealing it from their parents' liquor cabinets.
So which kind of leads into my last question. I promise, Mr. Chair, and I apologize. Mr. Garnett, as the district attorney, you were district attorney for what, 10 years?
Yes, 3 terms. Yeah.
From what year to what year? 2008
until 2018.
So you were right in the midst of the going from it was medical, then recreational. All the articles I read, Wall Street Journal, seemed to indicate that the black market actually increased when it was legalized. Do you believe that's inaccurate? What did you find as a district attorney?
No, that's a great question. There's different types of illegal markets. There's the local illegal market, and there's the out-of-state illegal market. The local illegal markets in most of the jurisdictions in Colorado began to shrink with the legalization, with one exception, which was in what we did find. Colorado has 22 judicial districts. I was a district attorney in Boulder, which is one of the most wealthy demographics. People in Boulder who want to use marijuana can afford to pay the tax of legalized marijuana. People in some of our poorer districts who wanted to use marijuana chose to buy it from the illegal market initially, not from the legalized system, because we were taxing it too heavily. We had to modify that. That addressed then the local illegal market. And I think most law enforcement people would now tell you there's occasional issues, but it's largely under control. What we did have trouble with initially, Representative, was the export
Foreign?
of marijuana to other states where it was still illegal. I in fact prosecuted a double homicide 5 years ago involving the export of marijuana to North Dakota, to the oil fields in North Dakota from Boulder County. And two young men involved in that got connected up with the drug cartel and were murdered in Boulder County. So that was a real issue. As more states have legalized and as we become better at regulation, and one of the things I focus on as DA was to partner with the federal authorities to get the out-of-state export market under control. Those issues have reduced, but those are issues that need to be looked at. I'm sure that one of the things that you're looking at in Connecticut, I think it's referenced in the summary from Governor Lamont, is you're trying to figure out, and we're now surrounded by many states that have legalized recreationally or medically. How does that impact our community? Those are things you got to look at.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Garnett, for your testimony and your service to your state of Colorado, and best of luck to you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, counselors. Representative O'Day, if I didn't know any better, I would think you were still on the clock here, billing by the hour. But next up will be Representative Rabimbus, the former ranking member. Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for your testimony. Actually, Representative O'Day hit on the black market because I was quite interested that you highlighted the black market in Connecticut, because I'm well aware that the black market has not, of course, been eliminated in Colorado, nor do I think that that will ever be a possibility so long as we've got such high taxes and expectation of taxes on the sale of marijuana. My question to you is, what are your thoughts regarding homegrown?
I think homegrow is a reasonable approach. We had a problem initially, and I think it's worked in most states. And again, as I indicated, I've traveled to a number of states and talked to legislators in different jurisdictions. Homegrow it works well, unless initially we had a problem in Colorado that our homegrow limits were very, very high, 100 plants, and that permitted people to then use homes as ways to facilitate the growth of a lot of marijuana and exporting it to the illegal market. The trick has to be, you have to be able to regulate home grow. You need to have your limits be reasonable, and you can manage the illegal market in connection with that. Let me mention one thing that's somewhat implicit in your question, Representative, which is I am not a fan of what's referred to as decriminalization, in which people, I don't like the idea of locking up people for marijuana. Law enforcement has a whole lot of other stuff to work on to keep the community safe. But the problem with only decriminalizing and not legalizing and regulating is you are creating a wonderful opportunity for the people in the illegal market who want to supply the marijuana and now have no disincentive in their customer base to not do that. So I do think that criminalization without legalization can actually make your illegal market situation worse.
And do you believe that your regulation of homegrown in Colorado has worked?
It has. It didn't initially. It was one of the many things we didn't get right initially, but I think it's better now. Yes, as we've reduced as we've reduced the permissible plant levels.
And is that something that you've recommended to the governor's office?
They haven't asked me about that, but I would if they asked. Yeah.
You would recommend that we consider homegrown and under regulation?
Yeah, a certain amount of homegrown is, I think, appropriate. Yes.
Okay. Do you have an idea of how much Colorado has brought in tax revenue? And certainly I'll let you pick the year. I would imagine that this pandemic probably has been a spike in that regard. And I don't know if you would have those figures. So certainly whatever you may and you may not know, but what are your ideas or actual knowledge? Actually, I shouldn't say ideas, but your actual knowledge of the tax revenue that has been brought in.
I don't have that actual number right now at the top of my head on Friday night, but it is in the slide deck that I sent you, and it's extraordinarily high. It's been shocking, actually. And Colorado is a state that has an enormous amount of restrictions on taxes in our Constitution due to an amendment that's called the Tabor Amendment. So the ability to generate tax revenue through marijuana sales has been very beneficial for the permitted uses, and is something that has been good. And again, it's the difference between legalization and regulation and decriminalization. If people are going to be using marijuana, this is where I came out as district attorney. they're going to be using it, let's regulate it. Let's regulate where they get it from. Let's know as much as we can about the market, and let's tax it so we can generate revenue.
And I'll certainly look forward to looking at those slides. Do you have a breakdown, or you personally or anybody else, regarding the purchase from residents in state versus residents who come into state, whether for specifically for the purchase and or just for tourism?
Yeah, the marijuana tourism question, which is a fair question. I think initially it was a fairly significant part of the market. As the novelty has worn off and as other states have legalized, it is reduced, but I don't have those figures in front of me. Let me just mention, we do have the Marijuana Enforcement Division in Colorado, which is headed by a friend of mine, a former police chief, Jim Barak, who's a terrific guy. They have tons of information and data. It's on their website, but I'm more than happy. Somewhere my email must be around. If a member of the committee wanted to email me afterwards, I can track down probably almost any information. I do know the general revenue numbers, Representative, are in the early slides in the slide deck. I don't want to take your time to watch me flip through them and try to figure out which page it is.
Not a problem. I certainly do appreciate your testimony and look forward to following up then with those questions, because one of the other things I'd be very much interested in knowing is the breakdown or percentages of not only the revenue, but then where it's being spent. Again, education versus
Yep.
rehabilitation, things of that, law enforcement, things of that nature. So again, I
great.
appreciate your testimony here this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Quinn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Attorney Garnett, for your appearance here tonight. I want to get back to the operating under the influence for a second. What penalties does Colorado have for this? And have they drawn any distinction between alcohol and marijuana for purposes of those penalties?
No, that's a very good question, Representative. The penalties are identical. They're severe, but if one is convicted of driving under the influence of marijuana, it's 12 points on your license. You lose your license. It's up to a year in jail, mandatory treatment, etc. But they are identical to DUI. Now, let me mention one thing that's not insignificant. My jurisdiction as the University of Colorado, which for many years was very proud of being listed in Playboy magazine, which I'm not sure if Playboy magazine still exists anymore, but it used to occasionally list, not that I ever read it used to list the top 10 party schools in the United States. And the University of Colorado was always one of the top party schools. So it's a school that has a tradition of marijuana use. One of the realities that we dealt with in law enforcement was the problem of mixed impairment, Representative, where someone would have 3 beers and then they would also smoke some marijuana, and then they get in the car and an officer would stop them. They'd know they were impaired, but it was very difficult to figure out what to do because they weren't over the legal limit of either one, and it was a challenge. Those are things that need more study. DRE needs to develop it. But overall, and again, the statistics show we've been able to manage it, but it's an issue. I think if marijuana is eventually delisted as a Schedule I drug so that there can be more research of impairment, we will eventually be able to develop the kind of precise levels of THC impairment that we have for alcohol, but we don't have that yet, and it's an issue we got to focus on.
Okay. Does Colorado offer any sort of diversionary program for first-time offenders? In Connecticut, you're pulled over and it's determined that you're under the influence of alcohol. We have an alcohol education program, series of classes. Once you complete them successfully, after a year, the case against you is dismissed. They do keep a record of it. So if you're pulled over again and try to use it again and not enough time has gone by, you get flagged and you're now on the conviction track. But does Colorado offer any sort of diversionary program like that?
No, we don't, Representative. We had when I was district attorney, we had a number of diversion programs for juveniles, particularly for young adults. I was interested to hear the comments. I strongly believe it's true that the basic age of adulthood, particularly for young men, should be 25. That's when development ends, although I think it's hard to do it for marijuana and everything else. But we did a lot of diversion programs. However, we were prohibited by the legislature from doing anything for it on a DUI of any sort other than prosecuting it and seeking a resolution within that framework, which frankly, given the danger of DUI, I was reasonably comfortable with, but we did not have diversion.
Okay. And finally, does Colorado impose an ignition interlock device on anyone convicted of DUI, regardless of alcohol or drugs?
We do it on alcohol, and it's tied to a breathalyzer that is part of the interlock. We do not do it on marijuana, mainly because of the difficulty of measuring impairment. But again, with further research and science, I think that's a possibility.
Was that a conscious decision on the part of Colorado? In Connecticut, you get stopped for DUI, and we've got two tracks that you find yourself on. One is the court track, which deals with whatever the charge is going to be out of it. But also, it automatically triggers an administrative suspension from DMV by the fact of the arrest. And one of the penalties that we've imposed is in exchange for having shortened the suspension periods that we were putting on people, we now require them to have the ignition interlock device. And at least as I read this bill and how DMV testified earlier, is they plan to continue to use that track, whether it's marijuana or alcohol or something else. And to me, it makes no sense if it's a marijuana based operating under the influence to put an ignition interlock device, because you're absolutely right. I mean, there's no way that it's going to be testing for what you actually got yourself in trouble for. So, I think I would agree with the Colorado approach that we not go down that track. But any other comments that you have on operating under the influence in general and what you've seen as a prosecutor?
Yeah, let me finally say, education and training is key for your police officers. Build a battalion of DRE officers in every jurisdiction. Use the money you get to train officers to do that. Make it, and I spoke at great lengths to the New York State Police Union last year about this issue. Make it a prestigious position to be a DRE under so that it's something people want to do. Train your non-DRE certified officers in the basics of it. Train your prosecutors how to handle those cases and how to present them to juries. And I think it's manageable.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for your time and your testimony, Attorney Garnett. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Howard.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. How are you?
I'm good. Good to see you.
Very well. Very nice to see
You've
you
been
as well.
quiet today. Something piqued your interest.
Well, it did. And Mr. Garnett, it's late for my colleagues, and I appreciate you giving us the time, but you touched on a few things I wanted to just ask you about because you are experienced in the field and we have a difficult decision to make here. One of my concerns, you touched on drug cartels. Are we in basic agreement that drug cartels outside of this country are not under control?
Yeah, I think that's
okay.
Yes.
It's a fair understatement.
Yeah.
And
No.
Are we in agreement basically that illicit as they may be, they're a business nonetheless that operate in the same supply and demand as most businesses? Is that a fair statement? We agree on that?
I agree on that.
So my concern, Mr. Garnett, is this: if those cartels are illicit as they may be, businesses that rely on supply and demand, and we legalize marijuana in this country, those cartels may shift to a different product to continue to keep their business going, and that product may very well be heroin. And I don't think we need any more heroin on our streets. We're working very hard in this legislature continuously to combat that. And I'm curious to know if in Colorado, if you saw that sort of shift where, and I'm not necessarily going down the road here of that marijuana is a gateway drug. That's a discussion for a different person on a different day. But just from a availability on your streets, given what I just outlined, did you see that, or is that a concern?
That's a terrific question. And frankly, having talked about this for several years, I don't know that I've ever gotten that question, but it's something that I've studied a fair amount. And let me mention, first of all, El Chapo's wife has been in the news, and for what it's worth, I'm functionally fluent in Spanish, and I travel to Latin America a lot, and I meet with judges and prosecutors and lawyers there. So I follow the drug issues and the challenges those countries have. one of the interesting realities is many of the people that have studied the situation believe that El Chapo's collapse and eventual arrest was due to it was influenced by the legalization of marijuana. That his cartel was so dependent on selling marijuana that when that market went away with legalization in the Western states, that he didn't adapt to maintain the power there. Now the issue is, what are they selling if they're not selling marijuana? And that's an interesting question. Methamphetamine, certainly. Heroin is an issue, of course, cocaine, other more dangerous drugs. Although I don't know that it's a appropriate public policy to try to figure out how to control the market of the cartels. I think we have to figure out a way to get help get the cartels under control. But it's hard to track exactly, other than, as I indicated, many thoughtful people in Latin America believe that the legalization of marijuana has put a lot of financial pressure on the cartels, frankly, resulted in a lot of the battles between cartels you see in northern Mexico. And it's because that market, which many parts of northern Mexico are very conducive to growing huge amounts of marijuana. And if you have any doubt, watch season 1 of Narcos Mexico, which does a great job of describing what happened there in the 1980s. But the question of what the cartels are going to do if they can't sell marijuana is one I'm not really an expert on, but I think you're onto something, that there is an issue there.
Well, before you give me too much credit, Mr. Garnett, I'm a detective. I've worked in narcotics for some time, so I'm a little familiar with how it works, and that's where that question comes from. And basically, what I'm glad that you answered that. Thank you so much, because I do think that it may not be public policy to control what the cartels are doing, especially outside this country and the state. I think it's important for us to consider that that's a real possibility, that we may see an uptick in some of these other narcotics on our streets that are causing, significant loss of life, among other problems. And I think that when we talk about the revenue that we generate, if we were to legalize marijuana, that we should have a focus into our interdiction to try to mitigate that unintended consequence as much as possible. So I thank you for your time, and I thank you for staying on with us. And Mr. Chairman, always a pleasure to see you, and thank you, sir.
Thank you. Further questions? Seeing none. Attorney Garnett, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for your time.
Next up will be Gauge McCabe.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Gage McCabe. I'm with Black Lives Matter 860. I'm an electrical engineer and a constituent of Manchester. I just wanted to say that y'all are completely missing it with SB 888. You're missing a huge opportunity and missing the point of everything being fought for racial justice. This bill continues our state's deep-rooted cycle in leaving behind communities of color. We have this one chance to do it right. Everyone says that once you do it, it's so hard to undo things. The point isn't just to legalize it, it's to legalize it with equity, to give reparations to communities who were criminalized and harmed most by its prohibition, not just to make profit off of it as soon as possible. We can't afford to just rush into this because a budget had to close or because it's something we need to get in front of. SB 888 does not address the harm or seek to repair the extensive damages caused by redlining and the war on drugs in terms of the economic and social inequities we still see today. How about the mental health problems that come with not having your basic needs met? It does not lay out an explicit plan for giving these communities their rightful opportunities in cannabis. Here's about to be a billion-dollar industry, and you want to hand it over to rich white corporations, some who don't even live in the state of Connecticut, giving them the opportunity to monopolize the market long before licenses are given out to everybody else in a loosely defined future date lottery. We need to bring life-saving, sustainable UFCW jobs and benefits, which include college education, to those who are actually living in our state that really need this. With the work being done to depopulate our prisons, cannabis can provide sustainable job opportunities. We have been imprisoning entrepreneurs, and they're going to be the best ones to run these things. Not to mention, SB 888 doesn't fully legalize cannabis. It bans home grow and includes jail time penalties, making access to cannabis not only cost prohibitive, but is so backwards and counterproductive to legalization because it perpetuates disproportionate incarceration. Sitting here thinking that you don't trust the existing network of Connecticut residents, your constituents, who are eager to start business and to step up and do adult use cannabis right in our state over a wealthy medical system just because they don't have a lot of money or big corporations backing them is classist and racist and shows that you are not educated on other bills, which integrate all of the support systems and connections necessary for equity applicants to do this right. Stop co-opting the word equity for SB 888. It is not equitable. It literally gentrifies weed. Saying that you have the framework for equity versus actually having it are two different things. I will not support dispensaries created by SB 888. I yield my time.
Representative O'Day.
Thank you. Mr. McCabe, did I understand your testimony that you just called all the people on this panel racist?
I'll be happy to read that part again for you. I said that if you sit here and think that your existing network of Connecticut residents who want to start businesses can't handle it because they aren't backed by big money or big corporations, that itself is a classist and racist opinion.
Fair enough. Thank you very much for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. We will move on. Sarah Diamond is next to testify. Ms. Diamond, you're muted.
Sorry, my unmute didn't unmute. Good evening, Representative Stoffstrom and distinguished members of the Judiciary Committee. I'm an applied anthropologist who has conducted federally funded research on youth substance use and public health in Connecticut over the past 20 years. I'm in support of legalization of cannabis for adult use, but not as proposed in SB 888. Equity provisions need to be strengthened within this bill. We know from public health research that marijuana is not a gateway to using other drugs. However, it has been used by law enforcement as a gateway to criminalize Black and brown people in our country. The current unregulated marijuana market presents a greater risk to public health and to our youth than a regulated market. In an unregulated market, people have no way of knowing what they're consuming. If we are concerned about addiction, we have to ask, what are the root causes of problem substance use? The criminalization of marijuana has not been effective in preventing marijuana use among youth, but it was effective in pushing some youth into the criminal justice system. What is equity in cannabis legalization? Equity is a fair opportunity for adults to use marijuana recreationally without being criminalized, and for entrepreneurs and people seeking employment to be able to participate in the legal cannabis market. Equity is also reparations by directing the tax revenues from the legalized industry to the individuals and communities that experience the greatest harms from criminalization. I support the plan to conduct an equity study. I recommend that this study assess the economic impact of marijuana arrests on specific communities in Connecticut by zip code and by race ethnicity as a result of the differential enforcement of marijuana policies in the past 10 to 20 years prior to decriminalization and also since decriminalization. So also expungements should include people who are convicted for intent to sell and for over 4 ounces of marijuana. Because of the selective enforcement in urban areas, I actually did many interviews with young people from Greater Hartford during some of the studies and research that I did. And I saw directly the impact that the drug-free zone laws had, racial bias, limitations in their legal representation, and all the, factors that people have discussed here that led to disproportionate arrests, and also the likelihood that they would accept a plea bargain instead of going to court. So they would be charged with the drug-free zone law, threatened with 2 years incarceration, mandatory, and so they would plea bargain out, even if they weren't, really dealing drugs. They never went to court. So an ACLU study that many people quote is the 4-time arrest rate for Black people compared to white people in Connecticut. It should be made clear to everyone that this is based off of FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting arrest data, which actually doesn't separate out Latinx individuals from the category of white. So really, The
Ms.
disparity
Diamond,
rates
Ms.
are
Diamond,
more like 7 times. Yep.
you're at the 3-minute mark. I need you to just wrap up for me, please.
Sure. Yeah. So I just wanted to say that, the disparity rate is much higher and that should be studied, and the economic impact should be studied and should be redressed through utilization of the tax dollars into those communities. And
Thank you. Representative Fishman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Ms. Diamond.
good evening.
Looking at the list, you're here on behalf of the Diamond Research Consulting Group? Is that-
Yes.
Okay, so who's your client?
I work for many different nonprofit agencies. I'm an independent consultant, and I'm speaking purely as myself and as an advocate on these issues from having done this work over the years. I've worked with many, many nonprofits in the urban areas in Connecticut around youth violence prevention, public health, HIV, reentry, other related topics, and always had a chance to interview the people who we're talking about who've been criminalized as a result of these policies and had very little opportunity to succeed in life as a result.
So just to get back to the question, you're here as an individual or as a representative of the Diamond Research Consulting Group?
That's me. It's a one-person sole proprietor organization. I mean, I have a few part-time staff on occasion, but
Okay, so you're here on behalf of yourself or a client or?
myself.
Okay,
As
so
yeah, I mean, I represent the consulting work that I do represents my expertise, I suppose, in this area is why
I'm looking at one of your clients is the city of Hartford.
yes, I did. I worked with the city of Hartford and Community
Simon,
Partners in Action.
Let me interject. You said you're here on your own accord. You're not here.
Yes, I'm here representing my own views as a researcher, as an advocate, but not on behalf of any organization that is my client currently or previously.
So whoever you consult for is not relevant to the bill before us.
No.
I'm just,
Question.
no, I understand, Mr. Chairman. I just, if she had signed up as self, that would be one thing, but
Okay, but you know what? Some of that is an internal process. We can talk about that offline. I don't think folks quite understand that when they sign up on the online system, the way that it's set up.
okay, just trying to clarify why and who and all of that stuff, because I think it's important to know. But moving forward, ma'am, you mentioned that marijuana is not a gateway drug. What is your definition of gateway?
Well, there have been studies, meta-analysis studies over the years that I could dig up if you wanted, that have looked at whether or not there's a statistically, statistic evidence for the fact that marijuana use leads to the use of other harder drugs. And that's been disproven. I mean, over 85% of youth have tried marijuana, but a small fraction of them go on to use harder drugs. So there is no way to say that just because you use marijuana, you're going to go on to using harder drugs.
So the question was, the question was, what is your definition of a gateway drug? And I take it from that you're saying the utilization of marijuana leads to harder drugs. That's
right. That's the way I would define the way people, when they say that it's a gateway drug, that's what they're proposing.
okay. So in its present form, the fact that individuals have to break the law to acquire the product doesn't expose to them to individuals that would be wanting to sell them harder drugs?
Well, that's a different question. Is the gateway drug is the drug itself? You're talking about the mechanism by which they acquire the drug. So that's a different question.
Okay. Well, because I look at both. The utilization of marijuana purchase is a gateway to harder drugs. I mean, that's, so I just,
It's not due to the drug itself. It's due to the fact that the drug has been the use of it is considered a crime. So I would agree that it's you're putting youth at greater risk by criminalizing this substance than you would if you treated it truly as a public health issue.
You're putting youth at greater risk. It's going to be illegal for youths anyway. So
Yes, but the response, if you respond to youth who use these drugs with a criminal response, you treat them as criminals, you're going to harm them. You're going to do greater harm to their future well-being than if you treat it as a public health issue. If you give them treatment, if you identify the root causes of why they're using, if you, identify whether the use is causing problems in their life versus criminalizing it and sending them to court and, imposing fines and other penalties that have been associated with criminalizing it. So, yeah, I think a public health approach to these issues is much more effective in the long run to preventing youth use and to preventing specifically problem use.
So have you read the bill that's before us?
I read the summary of it. I read parts of it, yes.
Well, are you aware that under this language, that an 18-year-old can possess a license to grow, manufacture, retail marijuana? Are you aware of that?
I've listened to all the testimonies. So from that, I gather that there's some question about the interpretation of the language around that, but they can be employed within the industry, whether they would have the social capital or the ability to get a license with all the other requirements. That's up to that will be up to the commissioners when they, the regulators, I assume, would make that determination. But yeah, I mean, if it's as far as licensing goes and who should get a license and the economics of it, I'm concerned about the equity piece. The age piece, I agree that putting some restrictions on the age of in terms of access to this drug through the legal market, there should be restrictions. But I also don't think that the response should be for underage use should be a criminal response. I think we should find a way to, to mitigate any sort of criminal repercussions or the label of criminalizing young people for using this drug.
So you're comfortable with the fact that an 18-year-old can hold any cannabis establishment license under this law?
I think someone who holds a license has to demonstrate that they're capable of being compliant with all the regulations. So, I assume that based on what I've heard about the licensing process, it's a rigorous process. It's not like just someone who's 18 years old who walks in the door is going to get a license. There's so many other requirements to be able to operate in this business. But I do think that there should be provisions so that an 18-year-old who wants to enter the business can get training and can get the skill set and get access to capital and get the things that they need. I don't think, maybe, there are people who are 14 years old who go to college and get college degrees. I mean, they're people, it's not about age, it's about demonstrating that you have the capacity, the skill set, the maturity, the ability to run a business, like any other business.
Okay. Once again, you haven't read the bill, so you don't know how much it costs to get these licenses.
I listened and I understood that it was costly.
Ma'am, Ms. Diamond. Okay. Representative Ms. Diamond, we're getting a little argumentative. And we're now 13 hours into this. We have a few folks who are left to testify. We'd like to get to them before it gets too late.
I'm trying to answer his question.
Ma'am, I'm speaking. Representative, if you have questions on territory that we've not covered, that's not repetitive, please feel free to ask it. But I think she has answered the question that you asked to her, and I believe we're getting into argument rather than substantive questions on the bill.
Yes, I'm aware of the level of acumen. So, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative O'Day.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll try and be brief. Ms. Diamond, what is your educational background? Are you a doctor, social worker? What is your
I have
specialty?
a PhD in anthropology.
Okay, so you heard some doctors testify about, you said that there's no evidence that marijuana is a gateway drug. Is that what your testimony was?
That the use of marijuana leads necessarily to problem drug use. Yeah, that it's a gateway drug in that sense.
Well, are you aware of a study in 2015 called The Probability and Predictors of Cannabis Gateway Effect, a national study report by Garcia and Rodriguez that found that 50% of habitual marijuana users went on to use other illicit drugs?
I think you could find the same is true of alcohol or any other drug. That doesn't mean that the use of marijuana leads to the use of these other drugs. I can dig up the research that I read. It may be dated. We can look and compare because research is constantly evolving, and I haven't updated, and done a search on this. But when I was researching it 5-10 years ago, I've been interested in these issues for a long time. So, I'm not here to testify on the public health dimension of it, but I could give, find the research that I was citing for you.
From 5-10 years ago.
No, I'm not sure of the date. Like I'm saying, it could, we'd have to look at the date and we'd have to look at the methodology and we'd have to
Ma'am, here's what I'm going to suggest.
Yeah.
The studies you have, why don't you email to the committee administrator, and we can get those to Representative O'Day, and you guys can follow up.
I'd be happy to do that
once those have been provided. All right. Thank you, Representative O'Day.
Thank you. Just Ms. Diamond, you're not testifying as an expert in contrary to any of the medical doctors that have testified here today, are you?
I don't recall hearing the specific argument about gateway drug being fleshed out in the discussions. The idea that some people may have psychiatric responses to the use of the drug, I did hear that discussed, and I wouldn't refute any of the medical, research behind that. So that I think those are, they're valid concerns. I'm not saying that it's an entirely safe drug. I believe in prevention as a way of responding to the very legitimate concerns about youth use. I'm not advocating for use to use marijuana, and I don't think that was at all the intent of anything that I've stated here. But I am happy to share the research that I was familiar with on the question of the gateway drug, because I know that's been an issue in other debates around this. I thought we'd move past that, honestly.
No, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. It's 11:11, and I am so appreciative of your testimony being here at this late hour. And thank you very much. You should be very proud of sticking it through, and we didn't mean to intimidate or harass in any way, shape, or form. So thank you.
No, I'm also tired and I'm a little nervous. So that's
You did great. Thank you.
I'm not taking it in the least.
All right. Thank you both. Next up, we will hear from Joseph Echatullo. Yep.
Echatullo.
Go ahead, sir.
Esteemed judiciary committee members, before we go any further in this discussion, I urge you to first expunge all marijuana-related possession, cultivation, distribution charges, and release all prisoners being held on those charges. Take the advice of Jason Ortiz, Kebra Smith, and Cure Connecticut. I've advocated with them here in Connecticut and on a federal level in DC. They are two of the most informed, respected, and coveted voices of equity in the country. Let's take our time, make sure we make right with the communities and people that we have destroyed through bad policy and the war on drugs. Day one equity or no equity at all. That being said, my name is Joseph Raymond Echatullo. I'm the founder director of the New England Craft Cannabis Alliance. I'm a Hamden-based grassroots organizer and cannabis advocate. I want to share with you some of the shortcomings of Senate Bill 888 and describe the ways in which it will effectively undermine the overall quality of cultivated cannabis in the state of Connecticut. It is estimated that at this very moment, there are 10,000 plus or more home growers and cannabis hobbyists in our small state of Connecticut. These taxpayers grow at their own peril because our archaic legal structure has forbidden them, these plant enthusiasts, from pursuing their passions legally. These growers bring years and even generations of cultivation experience to our great home state. Cultivation of a naturally occurring non-toxic plant, which has been relegated to the unsavory status of Schedule I classification for far too long. Allowing home grow to peacefully coexist along large-scale cannabis cultivators will not deter individuals from buying cannabis legally from large grow facilities. In fact, the evidence in other states is to the contrary. Allowing hobbyists to practice working with this plant in a safe home environment ultimately creates a more able workforce in the industry and has promoted job growth, increased production, and given the experience and efficiency of the workforce, and ultimately increased revenue for the state. Similar to craft beer enthusiasts who were crafting illegal home brew long before the federal government sanctioned the home grower, will continue to practice their craft whether this bill is passed or not. Much like craft brewing, small home grow operations are incubators for ingenuity of small businesses and entrepreneurs. The continued prohibition of home grow operations will only serve to deepen the gap between the rich corporations and the regular law-abiding tax-paying citizens, which directly undermines any and all equity initiatives proposed by SB 888. This kind of indifference towards home grow will criminalize taxpayers and force municipalities to circumvent state level laws. Oh, I lost my place there. And turn a blind eye to said illegal grows so that they may shift their regulatory focus to other more pressing issues than a handful of plants in a resident's garden. It would be a disservice to society to cut the craft enthusiasts and hobbyists out of the picture and prosecute them in the name of corporate greed. We are asking for a more measured approach. Sorry, I have two phones in my hand. We are asking for a more measured approach to your observations and seat at any table where cannabis policy is being discussed in Connecticut. Connecticut cannabis advocates are a strong group from all walks of life. Since my cannabis arrest,
if you could summarize.
Home growers are the pioneers of progress in the state of Connecticut. We provided ourselves while the state squabbled and gave no access or legal means to cannabis. So you must now give us a plant count and make provisions for home cultivation, the new legislation as recommended in House Bill 6377. Let us promote creativity, prosperity, and equity. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative Fishbein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, sir. You are apparently an advocate of home grow. Just a basic question. There's various schemes as to, how many plants various states allow people to have. What would be your recommendation should we have?
In my expert opinion, I would say 12 plants. It gives the home grower the ability to have 6 in flowering and 6 in a vegging state and provide enough medicine for themselves for the entire year. This is another basic form of equity, a very important one, and one that the governor is, his oversight of it it could really ruin the industry because you're going to criminalize a group of people that already exist in the state. Go to any grow shop and ask them how their business is doing. I can't find CO2 anywhere in the state for my own, personal. So there's definitely, there has to be provisions included, or in my opinion, the policy is a failure and people are just going to break the law anyways.
I thank you for your answer and your reasoning behind your answer. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Fishbein. Are there comments or questions from others? I don't see any, but I want to thank you, Mr. Achitula. I know you had issues getting in and you stuck with us throughout the day. So I appreciate your perseverance.
And I appreciate you, Gary. Thank you very much for everything you do.
Thank you. Have a great evening. Next, we will hear from Frank Mallett. And I think I saw Frank. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Senator Winfield. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. I want to thank everybody that's stuck on the call since 10 o'clock this morning with me. I feel like I'm doing spine surgery again, and I'm just revving up for my second case after 10 hours at the table. So first, I want to say that as a practicing orthopedic and trauma surgeon for nearly nearly 37 years here in Connecticut. It was a pleasure to practice in this state. And the rollout of the medical marijuana program, especially as it allowed me to get a lot of my patients off of opioids, was tremendous help, especially with neuropathies. So I think that the work that has been done in the state of Connecticut, both an honor and a pleasure to have worked here. Since I left practice, however, I've brought a friend, and I just wanted to touch base with my new passion. This little 3-pound structure, which I brought along because it is getting late and I need a brain, is one of the most amazing developmental structures on the planet. It gives a little conversation to equity and inclusion, because as I look at the 7.8 billion of us on the planet, every one of us has one of these. So it's incumbent upon us to take really, really good care of it. So my family foundation, of which I am the spokesperson, who's done some neuroscience research over the last couple of years, is completely opposed to Bill 888 for the reason that it recreationalizes a psychoactive drug that affects the 86.1 billion nerve cells and goes directly to the brain, especially when it's smoked. And this represents 100 trillion potential synaptic connections. We are allowing people without a PhD to practice medicine when they use psychoactive medications without proper regulation, without proper dosing, without proper knowledge. And as I said earlier, I think the state has done a beautiful job to date with their medical marijuana program. I think it should be expanded. We should expand research, and we should learn everything we can learn about the cannabis sativa plant, which actually has a lot of good things going for it, including its seeds with nutrition, some of the stems which allow significant hemp production. We can farm it, we can use it appropriately.
Mr. Millet, just to advise you that your time is expired, so if you could wrap up, that would be great.
Yes, sir. This is the center point of all we should do to protect every human brain on the planet, but we can start in the state of Connecticut. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I see Representative O'Day.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I again apologize to the committee for all my questions. Dr. Mallitz, I greatly appreciate you sticking around till almost 11:30 here to testify and for years of service. As I understand your testimony, you're very much in favor of medical marijuana, which I am, as the medical marijuana program that Connecticut has, as I am. But you have grave concerns about the recreational. Is that fair to say?
I must have said what I came to say well.
Yeah. So
recreationalization and just letting it out there is where I draw the line.
And did you submit written testimony? I'm sorry, I have not been able to read all the written testimony.
I totally apologize. I just found out about this meeting at 9 o'clock this morning, so I signed up. That's why I'm number 127.
No problem, doctor, at all. We greatly appreciate your time, and we're glad you're not billing by the hour. If you could please submit written testimony, we greatly appreciate it, doctor, because it does matter, and we do read it. Particularly Senator Winfield, he reads everything. So we greatly appreciate it. And he's got little ones running around, so he needs a little sleep aid at times. So, but in all honesty, I'm not making light of your testimony, sir. I greatly appreciate it. And this is a very difficult topic for many of us. And so thank you for sticking around and giving us your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative O'Day. I don't see any other hands, so I want to thank you, Dr. Milletz, for joining us and for bringing your newfound friend along with us. And I hope you get some sleep before we do. Have a great evening. Next, we will hear from Peter Sear. And I just want to say that there may be the case that there's somebody who we called and we missed. I will check before we close this out since we're at the close to the end. I don't want people to feel like we're just going to close them down. Peter Sear, you have your 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Winfield and members of the committee. I'm going to try to keep this short because we've had a lot of redundant arguments today. I'm writing this in support of SB 888, but only if amended to include certain provisions. I support the bill because the war on drugs is a civil rights travesty, and weed could be one of the most important harm reduction tools in fighting the opioid crisis. As currently written, this bill does legalize weed and allocates revenue to the pilot program, which is amazing. But aspects of the bill reiterate an all too common Puritan approach that will undermine implementation and prevent us from bringing full restorative justice to the war on drugs. I don't think I need to reiterate the equity arguments. I think they were made very greatly by Jason Ortiz and Attorney Ward. So I'll refer to you. They said it better than me, so I don't want to be redundant there. I do want to talk about home grow though. I think home grow is the only way that we chip at the black market while we wait for implementation. In Massachusetts, it took 2 years between legalization and the first legal sale, but the caveat was that you could grow it at home. I think it's going to leave a weird regulatory question mark and space that we're not going to be able to fill very well. And it's also just inconsistent with the law that we're currently passing. Banning home grow while legalizing weed, it's going to lead to vague and subjective enforcement, and we know what happens with subjective enforcement. I also just think there's a communal aspect to growing that is underrated, and we're sort of being overly punitive. It seems like a fake homage to a political compromise that doesn't really do a lot. So I urge us to include home grow in this legislation. I also think it's on the onus of the legislature to fix the language that the governor has put before us. Obviously, this is what the governor thinks, but you guys have the opportunity to make this bill better. And one of those language is just the name, I think, is a little condescending. An act to responsibly and equitably regulate cannabis use. This is perpetuating old Puritan stigmas that people who use marijuana are not responsible, which I think is wrong. So thank you for the time, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Sear. And I don't see any, but I want to thank you. You spent a lot of time waiting to testify. So thank you for your, Representative O'Day.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, Senator. Mr. Sear, my only question is really, as you may have realized through the last 13, 14 hours, my number one concern is trying to prevent kids from using marijuana. I'm not sure, and I don't want you to answer this question when you first tried it, if you ever did, but if you were to advise us how to prevent kids from trying it, what would you tell us to do? How would you do it?
Yeah, I think being overly punitive is the wrong approach. I think to take away the stigma would be a good way to sort of approach kids with it. Because I think anything you say, like, don't do that, that's wrong. Any kid is going to go and do that. So I think if we take this as a legal approach and we sort of are more accepting to it, I think you're going to see usage go down between teens. But I do share, and I think that's something I've gotten from this testimony. I think teenage use is a problem, and I think we could write things in this bill, such as a public health campaign that sort of addresses those things. But again, this is a framework that the governor has given us, and I think it's the legislature's job to fix it, right? Because if this comes out of the legislature, it's on you guys too, and if the governor signs it, right? So we could complain about the process, but this is a good vessel, and we can make the changes we need to it.
Thank you very much, sir, for your testimony and waiting till 11:37 p.m. Really do appreciate it. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative O'Day, and have a great evening, Mr. Sear. Okay, next we will hear from Randy Query.
Hello, can you hear me?
I do hear you. You have 3 minutes.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to for me to provide this comment. I'm Randy Query, Director of Government Relations for the American Association for Laboratory Accreditation, A2LA. I've been involved with laboratory accreditation for well over 2 decades. On behalf of the A2LA, I am commenting specifically to Senate Bill 888 in support of laboratory testing and accreditation. By way of background, A2LA is a nonprofit accreditation body with over 3,800 actively accredited certificates representing all 50 states, including 80 organizations accredited for cannabis testing. We've been granting accreditation to testing laboratories in various industries since 1979. The criteria forming the basis for our laboratory accreditation program is IEC 17025, General Requirements for the Competence of Testing and Calibration Laboratories. We ourselves as an accreditation body, have been evaluated against rigorous standards in providing this accreditation service and are recognized globally as an International Laboratory Accreditation Cooperation, or ILAC, recognized accreditation body. In establishing an adult use cannabis program, laboratory testing and the ensuing test results are critical to the program. Regular laboratory assessments leading to accreditation will provide the users of the test reports with confidence that the data is backed by a quality management system, technically competent testing, qualified personnel, and the use of the appropriate facilities and testing equipment. So we strongly support your legislation, specifically lines 119 and 120, in referencing Title 21A of the General Statutes that requires ISO IEC 17025 accreditation through an ILAC signatory, as required in Section 408. We also strongly support the requirement that the laboratory employee is responsible for selecting a random sample from the production facility. This will help ensure correct sample collection and impartiality. These accredited testing laboratories can be used for the quantity or testing the quantity of THC and CBD, and we'll be analyzing the cannabis for contaminants such as heavy metals, microbiological and mycotoxin, and pesticide chemical residues. The accredited testing will help assure that the data is supported by technically competent staff using validated methods and calibrated instruments. This is all good for the consumers of Connecticut. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Query. Are there questions or comments from members of the committee? Representative O'Day.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Query, thank you for your testimony. What states do you work with?
Oh, several of them. California, Colorado, Maryland, Florida, a few others.
And have you seen any court challenges to anything that you've done?
Court challenges, no, not that I can recollect. But our process is, we have an appeals process, or we can, when there are issues, we can have suspend the laboratories, that type of thing.
Okay.
And do complaint investigations. So it's not just a rubber stamp.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you very much, sir, for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. Are there comments or questions from other members of the committee? I do not see any. I want to thank you, Mr. Quay, for spending your time with us and staying here late into the evening to testify. Thank you very much.
Sure, and almost good morning.
Hopefully not. Kelly Jolson Scopino, you have your 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Senator Winfield, Representative Staffstrom and Representative Fishbein and other members of the Judiciary Committee. I am Kelly Jules Scapino. I'm the co-president of the Governor's Prevention Partnership, and for the past three decades, excuse me, our mission has included keeping young people safe from the dangers of illegal drugs and alcohol. And our focus tonight is making sure that any legislation that is passed has a keen focus on keeping non-medical cannabis out of vulnerable hands, and efforts are focused on harm reduction. Additionally, we want to ensure that if a young person possesses non-medical cannabis, that any consequences are focused through the lens of equity. So there is some good safeguarding in the governor's bill for young people and ultimately reducing the risk of substance use disorder, including not allowing for home growing, which would present increased access to our young people. It's very difficult to regulate the amount of THC and the amount of plants that are being grown within the home. Another piece that we applaud is the expansion of the 2012 social host law to hold those of age responsible for providing cannabis to minors. Some additional things that we would really like to see in this legislation as it's worked through the process is additional dollars be earmarked for public awareness campaigns similar to the successful Lock Your Meds or Demas Change the Script campaign. This type of public awareness is the first step in universal prevention and is critical to making sure that adults are securing their product and keeping it out of innocent hands. And we heard from Mr. Garnett earlier that young people have been getting their alcohol from their parents and now have been getting their cannabis from them too. So it's very important if this legislation goes forward that there is additional investments in raising awareness and prevention campaigns. The other piece we just wanted to quickly focus on this evening is that we don't think that young people should be facing punitive criminal consequences and fines, which is disproportionately going to affect Black and brown children and families. In fact, research from the Juvenile Law Center shows that financial penalties actually increase recidivism. We'd encourage you to look at the language that New Jersey just adopted, where they pivoted away from fines and toward an approach that focuses on public health education strategies and connections to community-based services, including mentoring, wraparound services, and mental health intervention, among others. We're here to be a part of this conversation, and thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you very much. I see Representative Dubisky has his hand raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming in. Am I correct to interpret it as that you were involved in putting this bill together?
No, we were not.
Okay, but you do support it as written?
We have a position at our organization that we are going to focus on safeguards for our young people, recognizing the inevitability that legalization of marijuana is going to happen at some point here in our state, as it has in other states. So we want to make sure that we are protecting our young people as best we can. And that was the recommendation that we got from our peers in other states where legalization has already happened. Make sure to have a seat at that table and advocate for those safeguards.
Okay, and do you believe that this bill has those safeguards in it?
I think it has a strong start to those safeguards for our young people, and I think there's some more that can be done, which I'm sure the legislature will take on through this process.
Okay, I note that you hesitated when I asked if you actually support the bill. So do I interpret that to mean your organization would rather not see any bill go through?
No, our organization is focused on safeguarding marijuana use, non-recreational marijuana use. So as a prevention organization, we would never come out in favor of any bill that was going to legalize without those safeguards. So we are focused solely on the safeguards.
Okay, so you do want to see a bill go through as long as it's got safeguards?
We want to make sure that if a bill goes through, that there are safeguards in place for our young people.
Okay, but you don't take a position one way or the other?
Representative, I'm going to suggest that question that you're trying to get at has been answered to the best of our ability.
Okay, I'll move on to another question then, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned that you were happy that there was no home grow provision in this bill. Could you explain why that is?
Sure. As I pointed out in the testimony, the piece that we are concerned about is access and compliance. So in terms of home growing, it would allow for more access within the home. And I've heard Representative O'Day ask many people over the course of the day and articulate his concerns for young people. So that is something that we have concerns about in terms of the compliance and enforcement of the number of plants, the amount of THC, and also just the access within the home, and being able to make sure that, again, young people are protected. And that's where the access for these illicit substances, whether it's alcohol, prescribed pills for someone else, that's where youth are getting them first. It's within the home. And so that's where we are taking a stand against the home growing.
Okay, have you, other states that have passed bills legalizing marijuana for recreational purposes, a number of them have home grow provisions in them. Have you done any research as to the consequences of those?
We have, and I'm not unfortunately able to share anything conclusive, but in the prevention field, the belief is, increased access like this would then provide additional access to young people. So we've gone with our prevention colleagues, and as soon as I can find you something concrete, Representative Dubisky, I'll be happy to share it with the committee, but don't want to misspeak.
Okay, so for example, in Vermont, which is essentially their whole model is based on a home grow provision. Are you aware of any additional access from by minors?
I'm not
on a systematic basis?
I'm not intimately familiar with the Vermont legislation, so I can't speak to that.
Okay, which states are you familiar with?
I mean, we've done a review of the states that have legalized marijuana to this point. And like I said, I can't point to anything specific where there's been any study in terms of states that have legalized home growing versus states that have not, in terms of the access to youth.
Okay. But if you have some data on that, you'll provide it to us?
Yes, absolutely. Be happy to share what we do have.
Okay, do you have any idea if that's in any of your, have you submitted written testimony?
Yes, we did. It's on the website.
Okay, is any of that data included in there?
That was not one of the data pieces that we cited, no.
Okay. What other portions of this bill do you believe prevents access by children to non-medical marijuana?
There's the social host aspect of the bill, expanding that 2012 law that went into effect for alcohol. And so putting the responsibility back on adults who would provide marijuana, thinking that it was not, there was not a risk in doing so. So that was a strong piece of legislation. I know that there's also pieces that have been considered in terms of the marketing and limitations there, but we chose to focus on those three to begin the conversation. And again, knowing that this is the beginning of a longer process, we can weigh in on those as it moves further along, but certainly want to make sure that any edibles are clearly marked and are not marketed directly to children.
Okay. Now, if this bill progresses and goes into a change phase, what changes would you be suggesting?
We would be suggesting tweaks, as I mentioned in my testimony, in terms of looking for additional funding for prevention and education to reduce harm risks. That would be one piece. And then the other piece would also be in terms of the fines that are currently outlined for underage offenders and those that would have possession of marijuana, that it would be done more through a social equity lens, and that rather than imparting those fines on a tiered basis, that again, it goes back to a public health and community-based approach where young people could be receiving services rather than punitive fines that for some families may seriously affect them from a financial perspective, but then also we haven't even begun to talk about the trauma perspective for the young people involved. So both of those things, and again, I think what New Jersey passed may be something for this committee to look at moving forward at that tiered level approach.
Okay, does your organization take any position one way or another on erasure of criminal records?
Sorry, I muted myself. No, that is not something that our organization has discussed.
Okay. All right. Now, could you just give me the name of your organization again? I apologize, I've forgotten.
Sure. We're the Governor's Prevention Partnership, and we're a 30-plus-year-old statewide nonprofit that's located in Wethersfield. And we have been focused on underage prevention of illegal substances. And then we also have a mentoring component as well.
Okay. To what extent are you associated or affiliated with the state government?
We are a 501c3. We do receive state funding. We also receive private funding.
Okay, but the fact that your organization the name starts with the word governors does not mean you have any connection with the governor.
The governor is our co-chair, and every governor since Governor O'Neill of every political party, independent, Republican, and Democrat, has been co-chair of our organization.
Got it. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your testimony. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative O'Day.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Julson Scupino, thank you so much for sticking around. From the bottom of my heart, you are one of the most important people today that we're going to hear from, because in my humble opinion, keeping these drugs out of the hands of our youth is the biggest concern I have. And so thank you for sticking around to 11:44. And my goal is going to be to get you a seat at the table to make sure that your voice is heard on the educational component and the public health educational strategies, because that's imperative to me. And I will be direct. I hope, my youngest son is 16. I hope I can forestall this for another 9 years until he's 25, but that's a rhetorical statement. It's late and I apologize. But my question to you is, do you know an Ingrid Gillespie or John Hamilton of the Liberation Program?
John Hamilton doesn't ring a bell, but Ingrid Gillespie does. And I know that we've worked with her for many years. And I'm dying for you to ask me the question that you've asked of everyone else too, in terms of like, what can we do?
Yes, what can we do to prevent teens from getting more access?
So I think the first step, Representative O'Day, is to have those conversations with your children. 74% of teens say their parents are the biggest influence on their decision to drink or use drugs. And so I know that sometimes parents shy away from having those conversations, thinking that they'll put the seeds in their young person's mind that, oh, if I talk to them about this, maybe they'll try it. It's absolutely the opposite. So having those conversations, those real conversations, we can help you through some of those. We have tools to have age appropriate conversations depending on the young person in your life. Like I have young children. My oldest is almost 7, and I will tell you this story very quickly, and I know it's late. She said to me one day last year, she was going to take gummies, and she said to me, I have to take my pills. And I said, what are you talking about, Zoe? You know, you don't have to take your pills. And she's like, but Mimi takes her pills. My mom takes prescribed medication. And so it allowed for us to have a conversation, even at this point, she was 5, about, you know, when a doctor prescribes something to go into your body, and that it's very specific and that you don't just put things into your body. And so I use that a lot as an example that even at a very young age, you can have those conversations and, you know, talking about the threats, and that it's not the marijuana of the 80s or the 70s and the implications that can happen to a young developing person. It's important to be honest with young people. So happy to talk to you about that offline when it's not almost midnight, but anything we can do to help, we're there.
Thank you. And please reach out to Ingrid Gillespie. She's phenomenal and one of the best in the business. So thank you very much. And take video. of your kids. They grow fast.
Thank you.
Mr.
Will do.
Chairman, and I apologize again for the long-winded questions.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kelly, it's wonderful to see you. I'm not sure if this is the purview of your partnership or not, but do you have an official position on whether this bill should kick in at age 25? I understand that you're about preventing access, but do you have an official stance on that?
No, we do not. I mean, certainly we understand the testimony that came before us in terms of the 25 and over, recognizing also the challenges that may come with having two different variations between alcohol and cannabis. So our goal at the end of the day is making sure that whatever legislation comes out is the safest for our young people.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Kelly, how are you?
Hi, it's so good to see you.
It's good seeing you as well. And I just wanted to say hello and to also thank you for your testimony as well as staying up this late at night. And I agree with Representative O'Day is that I think that it's important that your organization be a part of the conversation. It goes back to what Ms. Brawl said about having the stakeholders at the table. And we have to look at teen youth. And I agree with you. The train is going to leave the station. Do you want to be on it? And so you know that it's going to happen. So you might as well, make sure that you put the initiatives in there or the pieces in there that are very important. And I think that you looking at prevention is very, very important. So and it helps us. We should look at prevention, I should say. So Kelly, thank you so much. And it's so good to see you. And I can't believe Zoe's 7 already.
I know. Thank you so much, Representative. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
See you upstairs, right?
Thank you, Representative Miller. Representative Fishbein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hi, Kelly. You look familiar. Were you a state representative before?
I was, yeah.
Okay, I thought so. Understanding, your age, your group is very important. Do you have any concern at all with the fact that an 18-year-old can hold a cannabis establishment license?
That's a really great question, Representative Fishbein, and one that I've been thinking about through the day. And honestly, I don't feel, because it was not something that organizationally, and we have a board of directors where we've gone through a process, and we haven't discussed that specific provision. So I don't feel comfortable speaking about it at this time on behalf of the organization. So just would want to make sure that we have that conversation before I say anything further, but would be happy to get back to you about that, or the committee as a whole.
What about as an individual? I mean, because understanding that the license fee for a backer is $100.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, 18-year-olds, some of them are still in high school. I mean, do you think that's appropriate?
I think that in terms of, I would go back to what Miss Diamond said previously. I would, and I don't know a lot about the licensing process itself, admittedly, but just in thinking about the regulations and the hoops that one would have to go through, I believe, to get a license, that those regulations would have to be stringent. It's a hard, honestly, Representative, I'm not entirely sure where I am on that. It gives me some pause to think about, but I also think of, we have 18-year-old servers who, are working at our local restaurants, who are providing alcohol. And I know that that's a direct to consumer piece in there in an employment capacity, but I do wonder about that too. So I don't have an opinion one way or another. It's something that I've thought about throughout the day, though.
And I appreciate that analogy, but I guess the difference is that the 18-year-old can't be on the liquor license. You have to be 21 or older to get a liquor license.
So then, I'm sorry, Representative, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was basically done with that statement. So I know you wanted to comment on that.
I think as we've looked at this legislation today, so much of it does mirror the alcohol legislation that it may make sense to mirror that similarly to how liquor establishments are also licensed. So that might be another piece for the committee to consider.
And I know that, your prevention group is focused on, well, let me ask you, what age group are you focused on?
Our main focus area is ages 5 to 19, but then certainly we do extend ourselves a little bit further into that young adult category. So probably reaching up to those who are about 24, but less so.
And there's been talk today about why 21 and not 25, because I'm sure you're aware of, the developmental brain and that kind. Has your group taken any position with regard to the 21 versus 25 issue?
Again, organizationally, we are committed to making sure that whatever legislation comes out has the safeguards in it for our young people, whether it's 21 or 25. And I know that I'm not a brain development expert, so I wouldn't dare try and get into that conversation, but I know there's a lot of strong backing that says the young brain isn't developed until later in the 20s. So organizationally, our position is we're going to do whatever we can to make sure that what comes out has these safeguards in place.
I thought it was a little interesting in your testimony, given your mission is prevention. I know we have a prevention group here in my town, and they're opposed. So it seems like your group is resigned to the fact that this is going to happen and is not interested in just fighting the legalization of marijuana. Is that, I don't want to mischaracterize, but that's an
I don't want to use the word resigned. I think that, we've seen other states as recently as this week with legalization going into effect in New Jersey, that this is coming, whether it comes in 2021, whether it comes in 2024, and that in other states, like I said, where especially, this really came to us originally, excuse me, for stumbling over my words, it is a little late, that in Colorado, that our prevention peers were not a part of those discussions. And so then there were pieces that weren't considered when that legislation, when that law was put into place. And so making sure we had that seat at the table to make sure, because ultimately, like, that's not a political issue. It's keeping our kids safe. And I think that we can all get behind that, and making sure that we're doing it consistently throughout.
And perhaps I missed it. Your group, is their position on home grow is what?
Yet we did applaud the governors for putting in the prohibition of home growing from a prevention perspective. The belief is, and then Representative Jubitsky asked me for studies that showed this, and unfortunately I haven't been able to find anything, but once I do, we'll be able to share it with you, is that level of access, increased access with little enforcement, would mean greater access for our young people.
Okay, and then I just have you read the bill?
I have.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Rubimbis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening. Just a quick question. I'm just trying to get my mind wrapped around it. So you're in favor of the proposal before us so you can have a seat at the table and be part of the discussion. Did I hear that correctly?
We're not here today in favor of the bill. We would not come out in favor of any legalization bill. We are here about safeguarding our young people. And so the pieces in this specific legislation, the governor's legislation does put safeguards in place for our young people. It's a really strong start. There's a few more that we'd like to see considered. And we'd like to be a part of these conversations moving forward. So it's made sure that young people are at the central focus and keeping them safe if this legislation is going to become law.
Okay, so I appreciate that clarity that you just made it clear that you are not in any way supportive of this proposal. Is that correct?
We do not have a position on, we're neutral in terms of marijuana legalization. Our position as an organization is that we have, and I don't want to use the word resigned because that's what Representative Fishbein said. That's not the case. We've evolved over time, and that we recognize that this is going to come, and we want to make sure that our young people are kept as safe as possible.
Now I'm very confused because first I thought you had indicated that you are not in favor of it. Now you're saying you're neutral. Neutral would say that you're not in favor or against it.
So
So I guess that's just going to give you an opportunity. Exactly what stance are you taking on the proposal before us?
we are here to promote the safeguards for young people in any legislation. We're not for the bill. We're not against the bill. We're for safeguards.
Okay, and I can appreciate the safeguards. And I guess, you know, going back to the brain development, we hear that all the time, especially when it comes to juvenile justice. And you had indicated that predominantly you guys go up to the age of 19, but sometimes it goes beyond that. And this proposal right now is up to the age of 21. I would imagine that, of course, then even between 21 and 25, that would not be a safeguard for the youth, correct?
Yes, that could be correct, but recognizing there's challenges if there's a difference between alcohol and marijuana between 21 and 25.
Okay, and I'm sorry, the organization that you said you were a part of, you said that the governor and every governor before is the chairman of that organization, is that correct?
It's the co-chair, so there's a business co-chair as well of the organization.
And how much of the funding of your organization is state funds?
About 700,000.
And what conversations have you guys had in your organization directly with the governor regarding this topic?
We have had no conversations directly with the governor regarding this topic.
So the governor is the chairman of your organization funded by the state of Connecticut. And this is an issue that you're testifying before the committee that has to do with the youth and prevention of safeguarding the safety of youth. And you never once brought this up with the governor.
We have sent an email. We shared some emails with his office, but never had a conversation with Governor Lamont, no.
Okay, that's unfortunate. Thank you for taking the time to testify.
Okay. Oh, actually, I'm sorry, Representative Rabimbis, can I just clarify? So when Governor Lamont came into office 2 years ago, we did have a direct conversation about this, but about this specific legislation, we have not had a direct conversation.
And what was the conversation at that time?
It was at the beginning of his term, and it was just sharing where we were organizationally with marijuana. And at that point, it was still premature. He had not put legislation forward at that point when we met with him at the beginning of 2019.
And what was your organization's position at that time?
It was the similar position to the one that we have currently, that was promoting safeguards for young people in terms of home growing, social host law. I can't remember the other 2 points off the top of my head, but I can share them with you if you'd like.
Okay, no, I'd be more interested in having you guys then reach out to the governor and have those conversations now and not waiting until maybe it's too late.
Yes, absolutely. And having those conversations with his staff, 100%.
Thank you. Have a great evening. Thanks again for testifying. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative O'Day. Are you?
Hey, just for the second time, if nobody else has a question, just briefly, if I may, Mr. Chairman, I know it's midnight.
Sure.
I'm sorry, but Ms. Julson Scapina, just so I'm clear, I think, as I understand, looking at the website and doing a little bit of research, the Governor's Prevention Partnership is all about decreasing access and use of minors of alcohol or drugs, correct?
Mm-hmm. And we have a very large mentoring component as well.
And I applaud, and I think we need to get you more money, frankly. But I just want to clarify. I think it's your group's position that legalizing recreational marijuana will increase access for youth. Is that correct?
We believe that there is the chance that access will be increased to young people, which is why, again, we want to make sure those safeguards are in place.
Exactly. So if your group had its choice, this legislation, in other words, legalizing recreational use of marijuana would be
Representative, I believe that question was actually asked already, and I'm not trying to cut you off because certainly I want us to get out everything, but we are retreading ground at this point, and given the hour, I would hope that's not what we were doing.
Okay, I certainly, I was trying to phrase it a little differently, but I'll move on. I think we're both in agreement, and this is a yes or no. We both, your group, Governor's Prevention and Partnership, and myself, want to do everything we can to prevent youth from having access to marijuana or any illicit drugs or alcohol, correct?
Yes.
Thank you very much for sticking around. It's now Saturday morning, and I'm very appreciative for all your work. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. And I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to thank you for joining us and sticking with us into the new day. Next, we will hear from Christina Capitan, who we skipped over, and then Reverend Dr. Boise Kimber. And then I will check the list to make sure that any name that we called who might actually be here has their opportunity. Christina Capitan.
Thank you, Senator Winfield. Good, very late evening to all the members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Christina Capitan. I am a lifelong Connecticut resident and I currently reside in East Windsor. I appreciate the opportunity to provide my testimony tonight in opposition of Senate Bill 888. I am in strong opposition of this bill. I, however, do support the legalization of cannabis in a fair and equitable manner. There are four main reasons why I cannot support this bill. Essentially, it criminalizes cannabis even further for those left outside of a costly and confusing regulatory structure. It also immediately hands over the adult use market to the current medical cannabis infrastructure in Connecticut, and I believe that this will hurt patients that I care about. There is also no equity licensing mentioned in this bill. While poor people and communities of color have suffered the most from prohibition of cannabis, under this bill, there is no thought put into providing restitution or fair advantage to those individuals. Last but not least, it does not include any home grow provisions. If adults can legally brew craft beer in their home, adults should also be allowed to grow a number of craft cannabis plants in his or her property for personal use. I have now worked within the Connecticut Medical Marijuana Program closely with patients for over 6 years, and I've been a patient myself for over 7. I want to say that before becoming a patient, I was considered a criminal. I was diagnosed with cannabis use disorder for many years throughout my life. But upon becoming a patient, I was able to be employed within that program, and it was really helpful for me to move forward. So I just wanted to point that out. I would not be here today if it wasn't for cannabis. Also, I'd like to respectfully respond to the concerns mentioned about the potential for increased teen use of cannabis if we should pass a legalization bill. Cannabis is illegal now, and our young people are able to easily access unregulated and potentially harmful products from an underground market. Education, not criminalization, is the key to deterring use for that demographic, and that will be much easier and more commonplace within a legal market than it is now. In closing, the prohibition of cannabis has damaged our society irreparably. It has torn apart families, and it still does despite the criminalization in our state. Senate Bill 888 does not do anything that I can identify to try and even rectify that damage, nor does it address the true impact that prohibition of cannabis has had in our communities. Please consider introducing, sponsoring, or co-sponsoring a more compassionate, more equitable, and more sensible bill concerning cannabis during this legislative session. Thank you for your time and stay well.
Thank you, Ms. Capitan. Representative O'Day.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the risk of alienating my entire committee, I apologize again. Ms. Capitan, thank you so much for your testimony now on Saturday morning. Just a couple of questions. You said that you were diagnosed with cannabis use disorder?
Many years throughout my life, sir.
So, you know, I'm sorry you had to go through that. What year was that you were first diagnosed?
Probably about the age of 22, when I was originally court ordered to go to a mental health program or a drug addiction program because of being caught using cannabis.
And my mother always told me never to ask a woman's age, so I don't want to ask that question. But how long ago was that you were first diagnosed? What year?
I'd say between 15 and 17 years ago.
So roughly around 2007 5-ish.
Yeah,
Um,
5, 6.
And were you a teen at the time?
No, I was an adult.
Okay. And if you were to advise us on how to prevent others from being diagnosed with cannabis use disorder, what would you tell us to do?
I believe we've taken a huge step by getting the medical marijuana program passed and allowing people to access that. I don't believe that there is truly enough access. I don't believe there's truly enough education. I think education is the key for mental health providers, for social service agencies, for government agencies like the police, DCF, things like that. I think that's really, really important to avoid a misdiagnosis potentially like I had, which left my other conditions untreated or untreatable.
So as I understand testimony, you were misdiagnosed with cannabis use disorder initially?
Absolutely.
And so I'm just trying to figure out, so is it your opinion that cannabis does not cause medical problems for youth?
That's not at all what I'm saying. It could potentially cause problems. I think the lack of education, the lack of ability to provide the outreach and education is really where we're going wrong.
Representative O'Day, I would ask you to try to stay on the bill. We're getting a little, yeah, thank you.
Fair enough. No, fair enough. I'm sorry. So, ma'am, would you agree that we should try and limit use to 25 and older, or are you okay with 21 and over?
Honestly, I would agree with 18 and over. I believe that there are a lot of things that people are considered adults at 18. I think that as long as people are educated and we continue to do our part to do that, that people will make the right choice at any age.
Fair enough. Thank you so much for sticking around till Saturday morning. We very much truly appreciate it. And thank you, Mr. Chair, for the indulgence. And again, I apologize for getting a little too personal if I did. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative O'Day. Representative Fishbach.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ma'am, you mentioned that you were a proponent of home grow. That was one of the negative aspects of this bill. And how many plants would you recommend and why?
I would really like to see the ability for people to have, in their own, on their personal property, where regulation does allow and it's safe, for people to have at least 6 to 12 immature or small clone plants, and then also 6 plants in a vegetative state and 6 plants in a full flowering state, especially if we're talking about patients or people who need therapeutic access.
You mentioned a term that I hadn't heard before. I've seen it in the language, but since you mentioned it, I'm going to ask you, what's a clone plant?
So a clone plant, although I am not a horticulturist by any sense of the word, a clone plant would be a clipping that is taken from a larger mother plant or a plant in vegetative healthy state that can then be replicated to a pretty close degree to what the mother plant was producing, to provide consistent medicine for people. They know what to expect from that bloodline or that DNA per se from the plant.
And in your experience, how is that different from a plant from a seed? Is there a reason why you would want to have a clone plant over a seed plant?
I think it's a matter of personal preference. I think there's cost differences. I think there's availability differences. When you are getting a seed, you look at a seed, it looks pretty similar to any other seed that you might get. So you don't necessarily know the strain, the potency, or the components that are going to be within that plant as it grows, its health, its background.
I thank you for that education this late.
Again, not a horticulturist, sir.
Oh, that's cool. I just had seen it, and you obviously have some experience, and I think it's valuable. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Fishbach. Representative Dubinsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for coming in to testify. Appreciate it. Are you familiar with the Vermont model where homegrown is essentially the basis of the policy?
I would have to say, while I am aware of their outline, I have no in-depth knowledge of anything in Vermont currently.
Okay. The woman who testified prior to you represented an organization who that is trying to keep safeguards in the bill to prevent children's access. And one of those things that they are advocating is to avoid any home grow provisions, because it is their belief that that would give children greater access to marijuana. In your experience, would that be the case?
I don't believe that would be the case. There are locks on doors for reasons. Also, you know, my gas stove is potentially dangerous to my son, but yet I don't remove it from my home. I'm still able to cook food on my own. I don't let him necessarily use it on his own, but you know, kind of just responsible parenting, responsible adulting, and again, that education piece and just being open and honest with your children is very important.
Okay. And if there were a home grow provision in this bill, how would that better the bill in your opinion? I know you mentioned that you thought there should be one, but why would that be an important aspect from your perspective?
So as someone who's worked within the medical cannabis program pretty much from the beginning, I've been a patient since almost the first month it started, before there was actually medicine, and working closely with patients and just individuals outside the patient community, I should say. You know, having access outside of a system structure where you're completely reliant upon, you know, the hours of the dispensary, the availability of the product, the consistency of the product, being able to have cash flow at any given time, to be able to afford that product when you know, are potentially not well off. I think that would be a huge benefit to having it there. Also, it would provide a lot of compassion in the community. I've seen other communities, you know, prospectively Rhode Island, that had a nice caregiver program there. And they were able to help so many people, so many sick people, so many people who needed it therapeutically, pediatric patients. And it was just very, you know, it kind of encompassed everything that cannabis kind of stands for, and why I think it's so therapeutic.
Okay, you mentioned Rhode Island. I apologize. I'm not familiar with the law in Rhode Island. Did they pass something similar?
So Rhode Island has had a differently structured medical cannabis program for a long period of time, which is where I was first introduced to the production of cannabis for compassionate or therapeutic use for patients. And that's really what kind of sparked my interest in a more medical sense, to see the miracles that were happening before my eyes when people were granted access at an affordable cost compassionately. So, you know, I'm not aware of their laws currently. I'm sure they've changed a little bit in that time. It's been about 10 years or so, maybe about 8 years. But I do know that, you know, that aspect of compassion, the aspect of having choices for people and access consistently is important.
So Rhode Island's had a medical marijuana program for 8 to 10 years?
Just about 8 years, I think, about 7, maybe 7, 8 years. It's about that same time.
Okay, and is home grow part of their program?
I don't know about now. I know they have a compassionate program where they do allow caregivers to grow. I would imagine they would allow patients, but I do not know that for a fact. But I do know for a fact that they do have a caregiver program. Caregivers are allowed to grow a number of plants for a number of patients. And they're also allowed to give that extra or additional medicine to the dispensaries in that area, at least from what I'm familiar with.
Okay, and is there any, in your experience in Rhode Island, is there any restriction on the type of plants they could have, or the level of THC or anything like that?
Not that I'm aware of, but I am not super privy to that information at this point in time.
Okay, now if we were to have to insert a home grow provision into this bill or into a bill that was passed in Connecticut, would you suggest that it include any type of restrictions like that?
What type of restrictions? I apologize. Like
Oh,
as far as count or things?
Well, no, not necessarily count. I imagine there'll be some limitation on count, but something like variety or THC level or testing requirement or something like that. So essentially, there would be some control or some limitation on what is being grown around the state. Do you think that would be a good thing to have, or do you think that the state should stay out of it and let people grow whatever they want?
So honestly, I believe that regulation is a healthy thing, but over-regulation can be potentially, damage things even further. I would like to see testing facilities that are open to the public available to not only people in a recreational market, but also people who are within the medical market. It just provides those checks and balances, a sense of personal responsibility. I would like to see, if a consumer is purchasing cannabis or growing cannabis in their own home, and they feel that they need to test that cannabis, that they have the ability to do so. In the medical market or as a medical caregiver that has provisions to grow, absolutely, it needs to be tested. And I think that, that's a very important point. Thank you for asking.
Okay, but from a home grow standpoint, you think that the testing and the variety, I think it's called variety, isn't it? The
strain?
I'm sorry?
The strain?
Strain. Okay, sorry. Variety, strain.
So Representative, I was trying to let you go, but I think we're kind of going back. You've already asked her about the strains and she's answered the question. So I would hope that if you have other questions, you ask those questions.
Okay. I think I reached the end of my questions with this witness. So I appreciate it. Thank you for your answers, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. I don't see any other hands. So I'm going to thank you for joining us and staying with us early into the morning. I hope you have a wonderful day.
You too. I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Reverend Dr. Boise Kimber, you have your 3 minutes. You may begin. You're still muted. You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. I have shared 13 hours with all of you today. And so thank you all for staying awake and being a part too. The time for me to be turning towards legalization of marijuana here in Connecticut. And so we know that our neighboring states, New Jersey, New York, soon will be offering adult licenses for marijuana sales. The governor has put the tax revenue in the budget. And as a clergy and longtime opponent of legalization, I ask myself and the legislators who must make this decision. Is legalizing the moral right thing to do? Morality has many sides. And I know we cherish our sacred sense of right and wrong. Unlike in the past, I believe that the governor's bill has offered us an opportunity to see another side of morality. The social equity component of this proposed bill offers Connecticut a chance to be the first state to do the right thing by our Black and Brown communities, to do the right thing by those who have been unfairly impacted by the criminal justice systems war on drugs. Historically, the war on drugs has disproportionately affected our communities. The social equity component of expunging people's records, creating lower licenses fees, and creating an equity commission is a nice framework and is in the bill as written, but it is wholly lacking any real substance or real commitment towards true social equity. It would be incumbent upon legislators to put social equity provision into this bill to ensure that the bill is not just a revenue raiser, but addressing the morality question of doing what is right by Black and Brown and others with criminal records resulting from existing statutes. It is my strong suggestion that this bill include an institution to train Blacks and Brown and impacted citizens to be educated to work in a new industry, that there be licenses set aside for those communities, and that there be capital to seed Black and Brown and impacted citizens to own businesses and licenses if we are to expand to adult recreation use. None of these concepts should be taking place years after the state of Connecticut allows others to come in and profit off of our communities.
Reverend Kimber, I would say to you that your 3 minutes have elapsed. If you could summarize and then be ready for questions.
Yes, sir. The equity protocols and processes is an insult to me and the community, and should be the legislators. On day one, meaningful social equity must be a part of the bill in Connecticut. And this is a requirement to get my support, and should be a requirement to get your support. And we must ensure expungement equity is terms of financing, education for our entrepreneurs and workers so that they can be part of the Connecticut Next industry. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Reverend Kimber. I see the first question comes from Representative Fishbein.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Reverend. It's nice to see you again. During your presentation, you indicated that you've been opposed to recreational marijuana for some time. Is that fair?
That's fair.
And now you're changing your opinion on that. It appears, based upon the financial aspects, or I'm just trying to figure out why your opposition appears to have changed.
It appears that the legislators have seriously taken this bill up, having a serious discussion about the bill. And I certainly do not want the community in which I serve to be left out of this bill while you are seriously taking up the issue, whether or not you're going to legalize cannabis in the state of Connecticut.
So if, let's say the state of Connecticut just said it's legal, and recreational marijuana is just legal, no taxes, none of that, no, payment to the town, would you still be in favor of?
I don't think you, Representative, would even vote for it to be in that kind of position. And I don't think anybody who had been on this Zoom for the last 13 hours would just sit and say, okay, I've spent my 13 hours on here, so let's move to the next thing, and we're not going to deal with the real issue of equity with this bill. And so there is some assurance, some idea by us taking it up, by you all taking it up, that you're really serious about moving this bill. And so from my standpoint, and from a community standpoint, and from people whom I serve, we will not be left out of the discussion.
Understood, but just don't want to belabor the situation, but if the two aspects of this bill are the legalization of recreational marijuana and the social justice aspect, they could be dealt with separately. So what was your opposition to the legalization of recreational marijuana?
Well, I am not for it being dealt with separately. I am not for it being dealt with down the road. I'm for it being dealt with at this present time as the bill is being written, as we are adding stuff to the bill on a daily basis once this bill moves from your committee.
I'm just trying to figure out prior to this social justice aspect.
Representative, I hate to jump in, but I think you know what I'm going to suggest to you, that question, you've attempted that question multiple times, and I don't think we've made progress on the answer.
Okay, I'm discouraged, but I understand that I may never have that answer, but I think that's all that I had. Because if I can't get an answer to that, my other questions would go astray. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Fishbein. Representative Dubitsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for coming in. I appreciate it. You're following up on the questions from Representative Fishbein. You seem to indicate that you want, well, you stated that you want to be part of the discussion. Well, what if there is no longer a discussion? Right now, we have a bill in front of us, Bill 888, which is what this hearing is about. If this bill were to come up for a vote as is, with no amendments whatsoever, would you want it to pass or not?
No, I would not want it to pass.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And that was my only question.
Thank you, Representative Dubitsky. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Pastor. How are you?
I'm doing great. What about you,
That's
sir?
good. I'm doing well, thank you. Great seeing you again. Pastor, you touched on it in your testimony. What does equity look like to you?
Equity looks like Black and Brown are at the table, making sure that we are a part of what is happening with this bill. For instance, I've been sitting here watching all day, and the Black and Brown community, certainly we are concerned about education. Certainly we are concerned about healthcare. We are concerned about housing. We are concerned about healthcare. We are concerned about jobs. And I was listening not long ago when Mayor Elicker was here. I would hope that we would not just give money to cities in reference to their operation budget, and it never gets down to the community where it is supposed to be. In some areas in the Black community across this state, there is no Wi-Fi. We're having remote now and virtual now, but there are kids who cannot even get online because of Wi-Fi. And so I would hope that when we talk about equity, that we would talk about where the war on drugs started, still is, and that we would hope that it will not end in our community as is now.
Thank you for that. That was the only question that I had. And I agree with you, Pastor, that is something we have to do. If we talk about stakeholders, well, we are the state at the table. And so because of the war that was on drugs, that took place in our community. So I agree with you wholeheartedly that there has to be some equity, and the Black and Brown communities have to be considered first. And this framework that we have and this council, the social council, that's not enough from my perspective. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. And let me say this, this bill is not going to pass unless Black and Brown are in this bill, and that we are at the table, and that we see what is coming to our community. It ain't gonna pass unless we at the table. And I hope that the administration understands that we will be at the table and a part of the equity committee to make the decision about how we move forward and about the finance, the tax revenues.
Thank you very much for those comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Miller. Representative O'Day.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Reverend Kimber, thank you so much. It's 12:33 in the morning on a Saturday, and you're here testifying with great passion, and we greatly appreciate it, sir. If you've been listening, you understand my concern is about our youth and the exposure of our youth to the horrible menace of illicit drugs, and so I guess I'm hoping, well, in one part of me is hoping you don't get a seat at the table and this bill doesn't pass, and we get some more time to talk about it. But if you do have a seat at the table, how would you help us prevent the youth? What would be your suggestions to us on preventing the youth from getting access and the education they need to prevent the problems that are associated with teen drug use?
Well, I think that it is incumbent upon us at this present time. Hey, we've been fighting this stuff in our community for years with young kids being, and now we're at a point now where everybody want to say, we want, we don't want our kids to be stuck on drugs to get to be a part of this. Hey, Representative, we've been fighting it and still fighting it. We've lost lives. People have been put in jail. And so when we talk about the age 18, we want to change it now. I mean, we should have thought about that 25 years ago or 30 years ago when the war on drugs was in our community.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Look, I appreciate it. My true belief is we need more faith. We need more choice for our urban children to get into a better education system. And so, but I can't thank you enough for all you've done. I've read on your background. I know you've testified. So thank you very much for sticking it through. And I hope when you get a seat at the table, you get what you want and you help protect our youth. So thank you very much, sir, for your time and your testimony.
Is that's not what I want, is the people that I serve in this state. The Greater New Haven Clergy Association, which I'm president, the Connecticut State Missionary Baptist Convention, which I'm president. And so it is not about me, it is about my leadership, and it is about the people in whom I serve.
And that's what I meant. That was my intent in there, because you serve, we serve, and you have a higher calling, and as a daily communicant, I understand that, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative O'Day. Representative Dillon.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Reverend Kimber.
Good morning, Pat.
Good here. I'm glad that you're here.
Thank
you. I don't have your written testimony, but some of us have been having a back and forth about equity. Some of it is going forward, who's going to be involved in production. But when it comes to harm, there are individuals who were harmed and there were communities that were harmed. I can remember driving, actually ringing doorbells on Day Street, and there was a guy that used to pull in off of Route 34, pop open the trunk, it was full of drugs, everybody knew. He'd come in from the suburbs, actually, and people would go to that spot, and that's what those kids saw. And it affected the whole area. I'm not saying that was the only thing. And people are doing great, they're doing much better now. But there was a rough 10 or 20 years there. So I would really look forward to any concrete proposals that you have, Reverend. And as I said, I don't have your written testimony, so I look forward to it. But I want to thank you for being here.
I certainly Pat is my representative in my district here, and I certainly will get you the information in which we are proposing, and I will get that to you. I want to say to my Senator Winfield, who is senator in my district where my church is located, along with Robin Porter, and so Pat Miller, we are praying for you, and we appreciate you. And Senator, since I've been up all day dealing with you and the other co-chair, I want to say good morning to all of you. This is not the end. We will continue to move forward and continue to have a seat at the table. Representative Fishman, maybe you and I can talk off record in reference to some of your questions, and we can do that.
I welcome that.
All right.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Dr. Kimber, and we appreciate you staying so long. And good morning to you.
Thank you so much.
So
are the babies in the bed, Gary?
They went not too long ago, but they stayed up later than they should have. It's byproduct of doing this.
Thank you so very much.
Have a good morning.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna ask the administrator to just make sure that if there's anybody that we skipped over who's still in there, that we get to them before we close out.
Mr. Regner has been there all evening. We've asked him to unmute multiple times, but I don't know. I am here now.
Oh, okay.
Hello?
Mr. Yes, we can hear you now. You can have your 3 minutes.
Thank you, sir. I'm a slow talker. I'll pick it up a little bit. Thank you, distinguished members of the Judiciary Committee, for your dedication and tonight, and your long suffering and forbearance and passion for what you've done. And I say the same for all those who've been on the call since this morning. I think social justice is overdue, but it doesn't need to be linked with legalizing marijuana. I think, as the pastor pointed out, it should have been done long ago. And I wonder how many jobs actually will be come forward in the community, colored, Black communities. If we're talking about having stores to sell marijuana, there may be ancillary parts to that I don't appreciate right now. My position is my position only. And I think Connecticut should be unique, the land of steady habits, the land of steady thought, also the land of great deliberation. And we can be an example to the rest of the country as taking our time, slowing it down. There's so much information out tonight. So hard to weigh it all in the balance. And I would hope that science would drive this to a large degree. We put emotion aside, and we put axes to grind aside, and there's many details to be worked out as I see it. Should it become established as law, I'm not in favor of that at this point, and I would just stop at that point. I guess the majority of the country is not committed to this stance. It's against the law federally. We have a laxity of purpose in this country when it comes to law and the application of it, and being committed to the purpose and the meaning of it. There just seems to be so much that's loose, so much that really needs to be carefully resolved. And I think we just need to slow it down this year. Just slow it down and let the science drive it. Look at the competing evidence that science manifests. Most of the science seems to be weighted in one direction. A little bit tonight showed some contrary opinion. So that's what I would stop at this point. Thank you. And I'll be happy to try to answer any questions that I'm able to do.
Thank you, Mr. Regner. Are there comments or questions for Mr. Regner? I do not see any, but I really want to thank you. We had hoped to get you earlier when I called you, but I want to thank you for sticking in there and taking your time to take advantage of your 3 minutes. Good morning, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for running a great show tonight.
Thank you. Madam Administrator, is that it, or do we have anyone else? Representative, sorry, go ahead. Madam, I didn't hear you, Madam Administrator.
No, there's no one else.
Okay, Representative O'Dea, so your hand go up again?
Oh, no.
So
I hope.
I'm going to apologize to everybody, and I'm going on the record of buying dinner from the cheapest pizza place I know for the next time we're all together. And I just want to thank all of you, and particularly the chairs and ranking members. This was a tough night. I talked too much. I truly appreciate the sincerity and the way you ran this meeting. So thank you very much. And to everybody, I apologize, and I'm buying.
Representative, I'll move that to the consent calendar at our next meeting. We're both buying pizza and talking too much.
Thank you very much, Representative. And I want to say to you, Representative, there's never too much talking if we're actually trying to get real answers. So I appreciate you. You always stick in there with us as long as we go. So that I really appreciate that. And with that, I believe we are at an end. And so everybody go get some sleep. Good morning. That will be the conclusion of this public hearing for the Judiciary Committee, unless Representative Stasham has something else he would like to say.
Mr. Chair, just super quick, folks should have gotten an email, but we are planning on a committee meeting Monday morning. So it will be a short turnaround for the Judiciary Committee.
It's a meeting or a hearing?
Meeting.
I can't remember.
Monday morning, so check your email.
Okay.
All right. We will see you then.
All right. Good morning,
Have a
everyone.
nice weekend, everybody.
Morning.
Bye, everyone.
Night, everybody. Good
Good
morning.
weekend.
See
Thank
ya.
you, everybody.